We recently produced a video taking a look at how the ancient Romans got their haircut by barbers and specialized shops. During production, I actually remembered that the awesome HBO show Rome actually had a couple scenes depicting Julius Caesar getting shaved while on campaign. This made me start to question, hang on, did all Roman soldiers shave? And did the military in general have regulations about this, as one might expect with modern armies? This little tangent of research will form the basis of our video today. For starters, we can quite definitively say that Roman soldiers shaved and did get their haircut. For instance, there's lots of archaeological evidence of combs and razors being present near ancient army dwellings. What is unclear though is who did the cutting. For the general population, it was expected that one would seek out the aid of a barber or a slave rather than do it yourself. In the case of the Roman army, it's probably pretty safe to assume that this civilian custom carried over, at least during the Republican period when most troops came from the Italian region. Later on, troops recruited from other cultural regions would bring along some of their own traditions, which does muddle things up. That being said though, I think there would still have been an overall trend to follow the precedent set by the Italians. Anyways, soldiers in a contubernum could presumably help shave one another, or perhaps would even delegate this task to their military slaves. Otherwise, some, likely the higher-ranking officers, could seek out professionals amongst the camp followers, or even have a personal barber slave themselves, as we see depicted in the TV show Rome. Now onto the question of whether the Roman army had any form of regulations in place. Unfortunately, I was not able to find any evidence of this. Most of the people I found claiming otherwise mostly just point to evidence of trends in the civilian world, which we covered in our previous video. If I can allow myself to speculate a bit though, I think there would have been at least some informal expectations placed on personal appearance. The Roman army, after all, was keen on promoting discipline and routine. A disheveled looking group of soldiers would be contrary to this, and thus would be pressured to clean up their act. There's also the practical idea of hygiene, whereby long hair risks things like lice. But we should draw short of jumping to the conclusion that the Roman ideal would have been to have everyone looking the same with a close shave and buzz cut. This is pretty strongly refuted by the depictions the Romans made of themselves. A lot of the time, like in Trajan's column, we see men with all kinds of haircuts, from short to long. One could try to argue that this just reflected the idea that on campaign, soldiers simply couldn't keep up with their routine of haircuts. However, if you continue to look at other surviving art, the evidence mounts. Take for instance this relief of a group of soldiers typically identified as Praetorians. Some are clean shaven, while others have mustaches, goatees, or full-on beards. Thus we are left with the somewhat unsatisfactory conclusion that the Roman army likely had informal expectations on facial hair rather than any true codified regulations. But the video doesn't have to end there. I was curious as to whether other armies of antiquity did have some formal regulations. Turns out that most of the time the answer is just no, and that the appearance of the soldiers just reflected some tradition inherent to their culture. Take for instance the Germanic soldiers, who often sported the Swabian knot. This was a highly identifiable look on the battlefield, which helped make them appear taller and fiercer, but traced its origins to a cultural status symbol. After a bit of digging though, I did find one case of regulated haircuts when it comes to Alexander the Great and his Macedonian army. The specific incident occurred right before the Battle of Gaugamela and is relayed to us by Plutarch in The Life of Theseus. The quote goes as follows: "Therefore, in order that they being an Ionian tribe, might not give their enemies a hold by their hair, they cut it off. And Alexander of Macedon doubtless understood this, when, as they say, he ordered his generals to have the beards of their Macedonians shaved, since these afforded the readiest hold in battle." It's a quite fascinating little anecdote, but from what I've read, this story seems to have been more of a legend, which developed after Alexander's death, when his memory, and in particular his characteristic appearance, hung so heavily over all who followed him. Thus, we don't really get a confirmation of mandatory shaving as a standard regulation, even in this case. But please do let me know in the comments below if you've been able to find any evidence otherwise. Thanks again for watching, and definitely check out our other video on Roman haircuts if you want to learn more about this subject. Thanks again to our patrons for suggesting this video topic and supporting our channel in general. See you in the next one.